Today we're going to be talking about the temple. And so I wanted to just first pose the question, what do you think about when you think about the temple in Jerusalem? Or do you know anything about the temple in Jerusalem? Or have you ever thought about the temple in Jerusalem? Or did you know there used to be a temple in Jerusalem?
I can say a memory about it.
From Wednesday nights? Yeah. So you want to say it? Because that counts as answering the question.
Can I just say that I know?
Sure.
We are rebuilding the temple that was built, that great king of Israel built, our ancestors had, and he gave them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar to destroy this However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house of God. 5 verse 11.
Nice. So you already learned just by analyzing those verses a lot of things about what the temple is. First of all, that it's being rebuilt. So there have been 2 of them. Would be the first thing that you learn about it. Second thing you learn about it was built by a king. I think it says, didn't it say a king of great or king of old or something like that? Solomon, right? Solomon built it. Okay. A great king of Israel, yeah. And from the eyes of the world, Solomon would be considered probably the greatest or most powerful king of Israel. So that would make a lot of sense that it's talking about him. So it was destroyed once and then rebuilt. It's this big thing. Anything else that we can think about the temple? No? That's okay. Maybe we're going to learn something. That's the joy of being here. Okay. This is the temple. Ooh, look at it. This temple, is this giant structure that was built on the same mountain that Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac on. And that mountain is Mount Moriah, right? Is a very symbolically important mountain for Israel. And so when they go back to Jerusalem, that's the mountain that God says, that's where I want you to build this temple. In a sense, that's where the sacrifices will all be taking place. All of the rams, all of the lambs, all the animals will be sacrificed in your place on this mountain. All of the rams for the Isaacs, if you will. And it's this giant wooden, I think it's mostly wooden and stone, but it's covered and plated in gold. And just this massive, shining, glorious building. And inside of it, it kind of matches the structure of the tabernacle. So there's kind of like these 3 sections to it. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I can just read this all in the passages. Yay. So we're in 1 Kings 6. And I'll just kind of read these verses really quick and then we'll talk about them. So he prepared the inner sanctuary within the temple to set the ark of the covenant of the Lord there. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold, and he also overlaid the altar of cedar. Solomon covered the inside of the temple with pure gold, and he extended gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary, which was overlaid with gold. So he overlaid the whole interior with gold. He also overlaid with gold the altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, the 8th month, the temple was finished in all its details according to its specifications. He spent 7 years building it. So, there's a lot of interesting things that take place here. One of the interesting things that takes place here is that the temple is covered in what substance? Gold. If you think of gold in the Bible, can you think of anywhere else significant that has something covered in gold? Yes. What, Joseph, what's covered in gold in heaven, do you know? The streets, specifically, is what it talks about. But the interesting thing about it being the streets covered in gold is that, okay, well, what are streets good for? Walking on, driving on, riding a horse on, I guess, I don't know. When you think of a road and the way that a road is paved and all that stuff and how you use it, do you think of a road as something worthy? Like, is this like an amazing thing? Maybe not in Michigan with all the potholes, right? I don't think of roads as anything spectacular, right? Because they're there. They're roads. We drive on them, we walk on them, we get from one place to another on them. They're utility. It's basic. There's nothing grand or, amazing about roads. Even when you look at places that have all the, bridges and everything that are the giant intersection, whatever they're called, from the highways, interchanges, is that what they're called? Yeah, with all the bridges and everything. Like, there's nothing special about any of that, right? It's very basic concrete pillars, very basic roads. There's no attention to detail, if you will, on like the aesthetic of it or the visual interest of it. It's a road. So the fact that in heaven, God goes, I'm going to take my roads and cover them in gold, that tells us something about heaven. Right? I mean, imagine if we paved our roads in gold. If a chunk came off the side into your yard, would you be so willing to just kind of throw it back into the middle of the street? No, you'd want to hold on to that. It's gold. Right? That's valuable. It's worth something. Well, for God to say that I'm paving my roads in gold is almost saying, like, even the most worthless things that you walk all over will be worth something. Everything will have value. Everything will have that extra touch, that extra intentionality in heaven. And he's also showing us that in his temple on earth, right? And saying that, hey, every detail of this temple, the cedar walls and the floors, the altars, the chains, they're gold. They're all gold. So you walk into this place and you're just in a room that is covered in gold. How would you feel walking into a room covered in gold? I'd feel probably pretty amazed. Even just thinking about it now, I'm like, are they like melting down gold and like painting it onto the ceilings? And like, that sounds crazy to me. And then crazier yet is the detail of the inside of the building. The inside of the building is telling you the creation story. It's walking you through how you got to the point, basically, of walking into the temple. And so suddenly you're struck with this room that is awe-inspiring, covered in gold, teaches you about the history of the world. And just beyond the curtains is the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God. Like, he's sitting just on the other side of these curtains. And this is all of a sudden a room that's not just a room. All right, it's a special place. And so for Israel, right, the temple was significant. It was finally, we were able to take this tent that God was traveling around with us in, and we turned it into a permanent structure. And now God is seated on his throne in a building, and he's not moving around with us. He's in a structure. Greater than that still, the structure is beautiful and awesome and covered in gold. And on the innermost sanctum, like, your average person can't just walk into the Holy of Holies and look at the Ark of the Covenant and then the throne of God, right? You have to have special procedures and protocols and things to get into there. And so you walk into this final room, and it's this massive golden cubed room, and in the middle of it is the throne of God. And that makes me think of, in Revelation, right, when the new Jerusalem comes down, it's described very similarly to this room that the ark is in. It gives you a width, a length, and a height. And so some people think it's a cube, some people think it's a pyramid. Doesn't matter. It's mimicking the room that God sat in the temple. And that's going to be the temple, if you will, that he's going to sit in for all time. All right, so then we are going to jump forward into John chapter 2, 18 through 20. So the Jews responded to him, to Jesus, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" In a sense, they're saying, how do we know you're God? You're claiming to be God. You're performing miracles. You're doing signs and wonders. How do we know that you're God? How will you prove it to us? What's the sign that you'll prove it to us? And he answers them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It's taken 46 years to rebuild this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days?" Right? Like, we're learning about the rebuilding of the temple in Ezra and Nehemiah on Wednesday nights right now. It took them 46 years to rebuild the temple. And Jesus goes, "The sign that I'm God, you destroy this temple, 3 days, it'll be back." Now, what's Jesus talking about here? Yeah, he's talking about his crucifixion, his burial, and his resurrection. But the people that he's talking to don't seem to understand that, right? We get to understand it because we're in the future, looking back on it. But at the time, when Jesus is saying this, they're thinking, this temple? The giant golden structure that we see behind us? You're going to rebuild that thing in 3 days? Good luck. Now, there's something interesting that happens when Jesus dies that, yes, the curtain tears in two. And this curtain's not just a, flimsy little curtain. This thing is like thick curtain. This is like, it's massive. And it's giant. And it rips from the top to the bottom. How could somebody get to the top of that curtain to rip it? They couldn't. And if they could get to the top of it, how would they rip it? If it's so thick, they couldn't. It's only by an act of God that the curtain tears. And the curtain that tears is, in this temple, the curtain that separates the Holy of Holies, the throne room of God, from the room that is for everyone. What this shows is when Jesus dies and the curtain tears, God is saying, hey, my presence is not just confined to this room, to this throne. Like, I will be everywhere now. In a sense, he's been uncaged. Not that he was caged, but he's let out. And when that happens, if I was someone who's sitting here in this situation with Jesus saying, oh yeah, well, when you destroy the temple, it'll be rebuilt in 3 days, and then all of a sudden when he dies, our temple gets broken, you think that would get your attention? It'd get my attention. And what is he saying the temple is then? Him. I'm the temple. Now the crazy thing is that in the epistles, Paul takes this a step further and says, well, you're the temple. Your body's the temple. Right? And so there's a sense of, right, when we get the Spirit, the Holy Spirit on us, that there's a part of us that kind of is being pushed like, hey, be like Jesus. If his body is the embodiment, the physical, fleshy embodiment of the temple, like, you be that too.